Welcome back to Once Upon a Fun Fact. Today, we're venturing down the rabbit hole, quite literally, into the curious world of Alice in the Wonderland. But this isn't just any retelling, this is an untold story of Alice. Where did she come from? What inspired her creation? Why did she fall into obscurity only to be revived again in Disney's history? So, pour yourself a cup of tea and look out for any hidden Mickeys, and let's tumble into Wonderland together. Chapter 1. Before Wonderland, who is Alice really? Before she ever chased a white rabbit, before Disney animators gave her golden hair and a blue dress, Alice was just a story told on a lazy summer afternoon. It was July 4th, 1862, on a boat trip near Oxford, England. A mathematician named Charles Dodgson told a tale to three sisters. The middle one, Alice Liddell, asked him to write it down. He did, and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was born. But Alice wasn't just a curious little girl. She was clever, impatient, and logical in a world that wasn't. That contrast between order and madness made her iconic. Fast forward 60 years, and a young Walt Disney is living in Kansas City. And as he's scraping by, he's experimenting with something brand new, combining live action and animation. Who does he choose as his very first recurring star? Alice. Fun fact, Walt Disney's Alice comedies from 1923 to 1927 were some of his earliest works. They starred a real girl, Virginia Davis, placed inside animated worlds and helped them launch what would become the Disney Brothers studio. Alice wasn't just a character, she was the beginning of Walt's dream, a girl wandering through wonder. Chapter 2, Alice on the Big Screen, the film that nearly broke Walt. Walt Disney tried again and again to bring Alice to theaters. As early as the 1930s, he was planning a live-action animated hybrid film. But the story was just too strange to gain any real traction. After the success of Snow White, Pinocchio, and Cinderella, Walt returned to Alice with full force, this time in full-color animation. And the result? 1951's Alice in Wonderland. Bright, musical, and mad. And a total box office disappointment. But the story itself? It was unforgettable. Alice is bored, her sister is reading a book with no pictures or conversation, then she sees it. A white rabbit in a waistcoat. She follows him and falls. Down, down, down into a world where flowers sing, cats disappear, and clocks don't matter. She grows too big and sometimes shrinks too small, and she can cry in ocean. She meets the Mad Hatter, the March Hare, Tweedledee, and Tweedledum. And she joins a tea party that never ends. She even plays croquet with the flamingo. But then, she makes a mistake. She offends the Queen of Hearts, a tyrant with a love for decapitation. Alice is put on trial, accused of being too tall, too rude, and too curious. And just when she's about to lose her head, she wakes up. See, Alice's journey wasn't a love story or a fairy tale. It was a story about identity. A girl asking who she is in a world that keeps changing. Here's another fun fact, the original film featured over 550 special effects shots, but Walt later said it lacked emotional warmth and didn't re-release it during his lifetime. Chapter 3. From box office flop to Fantasyland icon. Though the film floundered in 1951, Alice would quietly find a second life. In the 1960s, her psychedelic visuals drew new fans in the counterculture era. And by the 1970s, the film had become a classic. And in the parks, she began waiting. Back in 1958, just 3 years after Disneyland opened, Imagineers unveiled the Alice in Wonderland Dark Ride. For its time, it was ambitious. Guests would board caterpillar cars and travel through a 2-story Wonderland. It became the first dark ride in Disneyland's history at that time to feature vertical movement between levels. But it wasn't easy. Fun fact, the original ride faced serious technical limitations. There were no railings on the second floor exterior path for decades. And after OSHA mandates began in the early 2000s, Imagineers were forced to add leaf-shaped safety barriers, which did frankly blend form and function quite well into the ride's theming. And since its conception, the ride has been updated many times. In 1983, Alice was finally added inside the attraction herself. And then in 2014, projection mapping brought it to life like never before. It remains one of the most beloved and quite frankly underrated dark rides in Fantasyland. Chapter 4: Alice Around the World, Parks, Teacups, and Mazes. Alice's influence isn't limited to Anaheim. You'll find her in every Disney resort across the globe. In Paris, you'll see Alice's Curious Labyrinth is a full-scale hedge mage with the Queen's Castle at the center. And in Tokyo and Florida, there is a Mad Tea Party ride that spins beneath canopies of lanterns in madness. Over in Shanghai and Hong Kong Disneyland, she appears in fantasy shows and the storybook Gardens. Fun fact, there are 7 versions of the Mad Tea Party worldwide, each slightly different in theme and its spin speed. Disneyland's version originally also had no canopy, which made those rainy days a little bit tricky. Even if you don't notice her, Alice is always there, hidden in details, designs, and decor. Chapter 5: The Meaning of Alice, Then and Now. So, who is Alice? She's not a princess, she's not perfect, but she's curious. She's also a little bit stubborn, but she's very smart and snarky. She tends to ask questions, a lot of them. And truthfully, that's what makes her timeless, and maybe what makes her hard to sell. In an age of tiaras and talking animals, Alice stood apart. She wasn't singing about dreams, she was questioning reality. And for that reason, she sometimes fell into the background of Disney's royal court. Here's another fun fact. Unlike Cinderella or Belle, Alice rarely appears in modern Disney princess branding because, of course, she's actually part of the classic characters or Fantasyland Friends merchandise lines. But if you ask any diehard Disney fan, they'll tell you Alice still matters, not because she married a prince, but because she didn't. Chapter 6: Why Alice Endures. In today's world, Alice is more relevant than ever. She represents the childlike wonder that we often lose too soon, the need to challenge systems, and the power of asking, what if the world isn't the way it's supposed to be? In the end, Alice reminds us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is be curious. So next time you spin in a teacup, or if you wander Fantasyland, remember the girl who tumbled into nonsense and came out stronger. If you enjoyed this journey down the rabbit hole, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment how many hidden Mickeys you spotted down below. And let me ask you this final question. What would you do if the world suddenly didn't make sense? Because maybe, just maybe, you would be just like Alice.